Hi everybody, my name is Adriana and today we're going to be making salsa. You can use this video as a standalone activity and just follow along with the recipe, or you can also use this activity in conjunction with the What People Eat lesson as well as the My Food, Your Food book reading. I chose salsa not only because it's the main food talked about in My Food, Your Food, but also because I just really love salsa. Who doesn't? This is a really easy recipe that I've been using for years. It's not even really a recipe, it's just kind of things I throw together in a bowl and hope that it tastes good with lots of lime juice. And if that sounds like it's right up your alley, you're probably going to love this recipe. So before we get started, let's talk about the things that we're going to need. It's really simple because all you need is a cutting board, a knife, a grater for zesting, and a blender if you so choose. Actual ingredients, you're going to need tomatoes, cilantro, onions, limes, and peppers. I have bell peppers. I usually like to use sweet peppers, but I couldn't find them in the store. If you like to have spicy salsa, you can certainly add some jalapeno slices. If you want to have a sweet salsa, feel free to add in any fruit, mangoes, pineapples, whatever suits your fancy, you can throw in. It's a really versatile salsa, and actually the type of salsa that we're making today, you can think of it more of like a base. So you can alternate it or make it different in any way you want at all. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so like I mentioned before, these are all the tools and ingredients that we need for our salsa. Again, feel free to add ingredients to this if you'd like to make it sweeter, mangoes, papaya, anything at all. If you want to make guacamole out of this, you certainly can. You can just add avocados to this. And again, the tools that we need: a cutting board, a knife, your blender, and a grater or a zester. So first things first, because I'm using the blender, I'm going to only roughly chop my vegetables. If you didn't have a blender, you could easily do this with just a knife, and you want to be safe while you're doing it, especially if you're going to have your kids doing this with you. So first things first, anything that's round, you want to make a flat surface for it. My tomato has one, but I also want to get rid of this little guy. So I'm just going to gently hold it using a claw. If you can see, I'm angling my fingers back and using my knuckles to stop. So you see there's no way that I can chop off my fingertips. So I'm going to use a claw as so, and ever gently press down to cut off that tip. And then you can just make, if you're using a blender, you can make big 4 chunks so that it doesn't overwhelm your blender all at once. And then because I don't like to be too wasteful, I like to just cut around this and get the good stuff. And then you can toss this to the side. If you're doing this without a blender, then you can take each small piece and gently work your way around. I like to put my hand on top of the knife so that my fingers are nowhere near, and then just keep chopping along. And the more comfortable you are with it, the faster that you can go. Make sure every once in a while you're actually cutting them up, because the skins on tomatoes can be quite tough. But you can keep doing this until they're as small as you want. It will get liquidy because of the juice inside. But that's what you want. That's what makes the salsa so good. So I'm going to put those in there. And we're just going to speed through my tomatoes. So next up, I'm going to do the peppers. I like to cut them in a few different ways. I always say there's no wrong way to cut a pepper as long as you cut it. We're gonna do something similar to the tomatoes, where I cut up the edges of this. Again, I really just cut this because I was trying to make it flat, and I don't want to have this guy because he's too hard. And then I just cut them into manageable pieces for my blender. And for this, I'm going to slice it down the middle, and it'll open up a little bit, and I'm going to cut off very gently the tough rind of it, toss it to the side, and I'll go around and do that to every part of it. Again, I'm not going to get too crazy with it. If you don't have a blender, do them in bite-sized pieces, and then you can group them together and just gently, really small, thin pieces. And don't forget to do your claw, because as you come down, fingertips will be in peril. And if that's not small, if that's too chunky for you, you can do it all over again. The next part is the onion. So I'm using a yellow onion. Again, this is really versatile, where you can use any kind of onion that you want. Yellow onion is going to be a little bit sweeter, or a sweet onion. You can use a red onion, one of my favorites. If you don't like the onion taste at all, I would suggest trying shallots. They're a little bit smaller and a little bit more difficult to cut, but they still give you that oniony taste without being overwhelming. And it's certainly a good hack if you don't like onions. But again, with this big guy, we're not going to be using the whole thing, so we're going to make him a little bit more manageable. First things first, we're going to cut this little tip off so that we have a flat surface area to work with. So just try and hold him steady as best as possible. If you find that you cry a lot when you cut onions, I always do. They make me super emotional. A good trick is putting them in the fridge for at least like 2 hours before you work with them. For storing them, onions should really be at room temperature. But if they are out on the counter, when you cut them, I forget what actually happens, but basically you're activating enzymes within the onions that react with your eyes, and that's why you cry. The theory behind refrigerating them, or maybe even popping them in the freezer if you're tight on time or you forgot to do it, is that it slows down the release of those enzymes, so it's a lot easier for you to cut them, and the enzymes don't release as quickly to your eyes. Fun fact. So now I'm just going to cut him in half. I'll save the other half. And there's still a bit too much onion. I think I might want to do half and maybe half of this. Yeah. And there you have it. So we're going to put him to the side. And now it's much easier to peel your onion. I take off the paper layer, and then I go one layer down, and I just pull them off. You want to make sure that the roots are always intact when you're cutting your onions, because that's going to make it a lot easier to cut them. You won't have all the pieces spraying all over the place. And this is how I cut onions. If you have an onion chopper, that's certainly good to use and a lot more efficient, a lot quicker, a lot less tears are involved. This is what I learned. Basically, your hand on top of the onion, and then, but I'm gonna put it to the side so you can see. And holding your knife parallel to the cutting board, you're going to press down the onion and you're gonna saw your way through, trying to keep your knife as even as possible. And you're gonna stop about 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch before the root. And that's gonna ensure that it holds on to everything. And so you kind of just eyeball it, you go up maybe 1/4 inch more, and you do the same thing. It does get difficult. My knife isn't terribly sharp. You know, it's the knife I use every day. And I go as far as I can go. The next part, you're going to make lines. You're gonna make cuts going across. So you're gonna push in and pull out. It's okay if you have some separation. But basically you're trying to go with the curve of the onion. So you don't want to have a straight line going this way because then you have a giant chunk you haven't done. So you're going to try and just go as far as you can. And the last one is always tricky. Okay, so now it's okay that we've had a little escapees. We're going to hold it in a claw and holding it together, keeping your hand safe. And we're going to measure out how small we want it, or how big we want it. For your sake, I'm going to show you the small version. And we're just going to slice, and we're going to push down. And anything that splays to the side, we're not going to worry about. It's starting to like fan out because I can't hold it properly. Don't worry about it too much. Even if you're not using the blender, we're gonna deal with it. So then you start to get to the point where you haven't cut close to the root. So I'm just gonna push these onions to the side, and then I'm just gonna chop. And I just do like a wild and free chop so that I'm not wasting too much. And I turn and I chop these up. And again, so now you have your pile. You can separate this depending on how big your recipe is doing. The recipe that I'm doing is probably good for about 4 people or so. It's not a hard and fast recipe, and I'm not gonna say, you know, 1/2 pound of tomatoes will exactly feed this many people. This is the recipe that I'm doing according to my tastes, and again, easily adjustable, easily changeable. You can add more onion, you can leave out more onion, you can put in more peppers, you can put in more tomatoes, whatever you want. So if you do have more onions, basically, you can separate this, you know, put this in half, and the next part you can do in a much more manageable pile, which is the same that we've been doing this entire time, and just chopping them down to smaller pieces. I won't, because I am blending it all up. And you know what? If you do start crying during this, sometimes it's really, you know, nice and cathartic. Okay, so now we're gonna do cilantro. So it's not a lot of cilantro, and I know cilantro can be kind of controversial for people. So if you don't like cilantro, certainly you can leave it out. I've done it without cilantro before. You can substitute parsley for it, which is a little bit more gentle. Or if you're a cilantro fan, you can just, you know, go hog wild and go for it. So I like to pluck them off their leaves. There's some that are a little discolored, but I think they'll be okay. You can just pick off the discolored part if it bothers you. Okay. And then I try and bunch it up as much as I can to make this next part easier. Oop, careful. And I just give it a nice little chop. Again, no blender, just keep chopping. Alright, my favorite part, limes. So I like to give them a squeeze, and if they feel a little tough, here's a trick that I do. So I usually take the limes, or this works for lemons, even oranges, any kind of citrus that has its own wrapping like this. Cutting board, hand on top, and just putting all your pressure, squeezing and rolling back and forth. So let's see if I can show you. Squeezing and rolling. And as you do it, you'll see that it gets much more squishier. And you just keep going. And this is loosening up all those fibers that are inside, loosening up those juices, so it makes it a little bit easier for you to squeeze. If you have a juicer, you could certainly use that. I unfortunately do not. So, he's nice and squishy. So now I'm going to take my grater and over my blender. There's a ton of salsa. I don't think you guys can see that, but usually I would do it over my blender so it's a little bit easier. You can do your grater facing down with the rough part up, of course, and just gently give it, you know, 1 or 2 passes. Once you see that white part, that's the rind, and that actually gets pretty bitter. So if you keep just doing the same spot over and over again, it's not going to taste as good. So rotate it every once in a while, 2 or 3 passes, and you start to get different little patches all over the place. So I knock that all out. We have a nice little pile of zest. I'm not shy about it, so this whole thing is going in there. And then you're gonna take your limes, cut them in half. I know I at least do 2 every time. And then you can squeeze right into your blender. And really try and get all that juice out. The last bit is salt and pepper. Alright, so now we're ready to blend. Okay, so now that we have everything in our blender, we're going to go ahead and blend it. I'm going to slowly pulse it until I feel like it's the right consistency. And if need be, I'll stop and stir it up and make sure that every piece is getting ground down the way that I want it to and incorporated how I want it. So first things first, I'm going to run it on the lowest setting, and I'm just going to switch it on so it can run. And once I see that it's getting close to where I want it, I'll stop it and then I'll pulse it. Okay, so I have a silicone spatula I'm going to be using, and I'm just going to push down the sides to make sure that everything gets in there as I'm pulsing it now. we're gonna give it a little taste and we're gonna see if it needs any more salt, pepper, or lime. Okay, so it gets a little bit more salt, maybe another pinch and a half. A little bit more pepper, and definitely that last lime. And back on just to incorporate. Okay. We are on the money. The chips that I have are a hint of lime. Again, you really can't tell that I love lime that much. And this could use a little bit of salt, but I think with the chips, this is just gonna come out perfect. So let's put this in a bowl and let's eat. So that didn't take too long. And here is our finished product. So mine turned out a little bit more yellow-orange because I used the yellow and orange bell peppers, if you remember. If I used the red bell pepper, it'd be more red. I could have added some more tomatoes to it, but right now it's just me and my fiance, so I don't have to have that much salsa, although this will be eaten within the next 2 weeks. And that's typically how long your salsa will last. So because it has that acid in there, it's gonna be preserved pretty well. Just keep it in the fridge, only take out a little bit as you need it, and enjoy your vegetables.